Thank you for joining us on Innovation Nation. We have Jon Harris again for a part C of our conversation. We are going to talk about the art of possibility and specifically artificial intelligence. And so Jon is going to be one of my, strong thought leaders here to talk to us about it today. And Jon, if you can give a quick intro once again for those who may be calling in or listening in for the first time, that'd be great.
Yeah, awesome. So welcome back, or welcome to Innovation Nation for the first time. Third installment here with Sarah, super excited. So I've been in the industry for about 15 years. I currently work for a company called Guidepost Solutions, global security and compliance consulting firm. I'm the director of enterprise solutions. So most of my time working with companies, trying to provide them all of our services in one simple form and fashion, so that they don't have to, kind of figure out how to do everything they need to do with security, whether it's cybersecurity, physical security, technology, whatever. We bring that to them through, hopefully one easy, simple service package that I help deliver. Been in the, like I said, industry for a while. Spent most of my time with an aerospace and defense company, various levels of leadership, ultimately ending up managing a multi-compliance organization with global responsibility stuff all over the world. So have a unique background of being, and I also spent a little bit of time working for a security technology company manufacturer. So end user, manufacturer, now consultant. So bring some different variation views of our industry to the conversation.
Thank you. It's a great intro. And to your point, you have a very nice and well-rounded experience, which I think is going to be great for the conversation today, because for those, as I mentioned earlier, listening, we're going to dive into artificial intelligence and what it is foundationally and how it applies to our industry as a whole. Now, I'm just going to disclose this and share this up front. I personally do work at a company that is leveraging AI, but I'm going to just say that this isn't a commercial for that. We're going to keep it agnostic, right? We're going to keep it, we're going to talk about
Exactly.
the really cool things that we can get as an industry, not just because of one product, right? Because AI is leading it's paving a new path for us. So Jon, if you can just kick it off from your perspective, help us define and understand AI, if we can start there. And then I'd like to discuss a few of the things, we were talking about before we started the recording.
Yeah, so I think that AI is a very broad term, and it can be very simple as far as like something that qualifies for artificial intelligence. So if you think about at its basic level, you're taking process steps or maybe if, then, when decision making, and you're automating it. So AI, just that is automation of human decision factors. So like that's it, and it can be very simple. Like when I see a license plate that meets this qualification, I open the door to the ramp, or the arm lift, right? That's something that historically a human had to do. I watch, I see, yes, that's the right license plate. I press the button, it opens. If I'm automating all those decision factors, it's now artificial intelligence at a very simplified level, right? So now as we mature into greater challenges and more automation, and we go from artificial intelligence to machine learning to deep learning, which we talked a little bit about in our previous discussions, those are where like the crazy stuff happens, where computers are now augmenting the learning process and taking over and really learning how to perform human steps. So you think about how like early artificial intelligence really was like in kind of games like chess, right? So like the early like IBM artificial intelligence was able to learn how to play chess or be taught how to play chess, right? So taking those decision factors and automating it. So
really, yeah. So I just want to pause there for a second, because that first off, great way to give that overarching, explanation of it. I do want to dive into one little detail though that you mentioned, I'll kind of touch on it from my perspective, but you just said teaching, the system is learning. We're teaching it to do something. So just to break that down, right? There's a human who writes a code and feeds that to a computer and tells the computer, hey, these are the trends you need to look for. These are we feed it an algorithm, right? And people out there may or may not know what an algorithm is, right? But an algorithm is really a pattern. It's a code in which we're telling a computer to look for. And so we're teaching it the common things that it needs to, quote, look for, and then make a decision based on, right?
Yeah.
So just like a human would do that, but because us humans know through repetition what we need to get done, like the license plate example, that guard at the gate knows I need to look for these license plate numbers, and these ones are access granted, these ones are access denied. We take that data, that information, we feed it in, and then we basically use that repetitive process through a computer instead of a human to then make more efficiencies and free up more of our time, right?
Well, and that's when you start getting into machine learning versus just artificial intelligence, right? So to try to take the waterfall one step at a time, the artificial intelligence, the first part is just automating the decision processes. And then if you then take that data and you correlate it and learn from it, for instance, you say that, okay, now we can make certain inferences from the data that we have and start aggregating it and teaching your algorithm something, right? So we'll say with our license plate example and say that, there's certain factors, we want to, maybe it's just like, there's some factor about when the cars are coming in that we want to make it more expeditious, or we want to do something a little bit differently, but we need data, right? So we're gonna for months, we're going to track all the cars and everything and the times they come in and the times they leave and all that. And based on that information, we're going to do something, right? We don't know what we're going to do yet, but whatever that use case is that you create, you have to gather that information and then teach it to do something. So maybe what you're teaching it is to say, the duration in which that the door, like right now, the arm stays up for 30 seconds. But we need to figure out an optimal time for that door to come up. So maybe we want to look at what's the difference between when the cars come in, and are there other times in the day where it's very busy versus not, but we can augment that and have it be 10 seconds versus 30 seconds, whatever. And instead of having a person sit there and run through all that data and make those decisions, you train your algorithm to not just learn it the first time, but then continuously tweak it based on more data. It's like when in baseball, right? So when a pitcher is going through an order with the batter sees him for the first time, the pitcher has the advantage because they don't know what kind of pitches they throw. The second time, the batter knows a little bit more. Okay, when I get him, down 0-2, he's likely to throw a curveball. All right, we know that now. Or I know maybe he tips his hand this way. Third round, that's why statistically most pitchers don't throw a lineup more than 3 times, because then the hitter's capability goes up exponentially based on the information they now have on that pitcher. So the same statistical applications apply in AI and in any security environment where you have consistent things happening over and over again where you can collect that information.
Yeah. And, I think it's important to, before we really even dive further into this and talk more details around efficiencies and kind of I'm going to share that story earlier from today, but I just want to say, I guess we have to remember though, that at the end of the day, AI and artificial intelligence and what you and I are describing, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for humans.
Right.
Right? So I think it's really important that we say that, because a lot of people out there have this perception of the Matrix. They think that, I'm seriously, right? Or Minority Report. They're like, computers are coming after us. But you have to remember, if it wasn't for the human, we wouldn't have a computer.
Yeah.
right?
Well, and that cuts both ways, right? And that's where some of the resistance to AI comes from. So, like, I mean, right now, mortgages are delivered via AI. So you go to Rocket Mortgage and you fill out that little, 4 questionnaire to give you all your information. There is an algorithm that is deciding whether or not you are creditworthy. That's how they get you that information back in 30 seconds to tell you whether or not you meet the minimum threshold. They're using AI and an algorithm to determine that. So there is curiosity around the biases that are created within the artificial intelligence algorithms because of the human factors that are creating them, that your innate biases can enter the artificial intelligence. So, so that's where when you start applying it towards like enforcement or rules engines or things like that, they're are gonna create some sort of outcome that's going to determine the future of the individual. A job application, funding for a mortgage or credit worthiness, what have you. That could, that's where people start to get a little worried about it. Same thing with like the facial recognition software that gets utilized to identify someone and run them against criminal records and determine whether or not this person is on like our BOLO list or whatever the case is, right? There's some privacy considerations and challenges. I mean, there's a number of states in the U.S. I think New York has their SHIELD Act that's coming through shortly. Texas, California, Illinois have some of the 3 most strenuous, and I think either like Washington or Oregon, somebody up on the in the Pacific Northwest as well. Maybe it was just straight out banned facial recognition. I think SIA has been advocating on the
other side,
kind of of like the short-sightedness of straight up banning it, right? There's kind of like an in between. But to your point, like there's we're this like Skynet isn't here yet, right? So like Terminator, Skynet turning and like sending the robots against us, it's far off, and it requires like it's a human check and balance that's still there. With that said, you have to make sure that we're not using it for nefarious. Like any human can use it for both good and bad, right? So like there is a capability to be applying it for its negative usage. For our conversation, though, we're gonna assume positive intent, right? That we're using it for the right reasons. And I also like fundamentally agree and appreciate with your point around that it's only going to go as far right now as human interaction and intervention creates it. Now, you could make the argument that eventually, and right now it's really based on the ability to have computing power to push computers to create its own thought process and create its own neural networks and learn on its own. But it's still capable of being bounded by human rules.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I will say, I think you and I at this point, I will say, I think we've done a good job though at kind of, highlighting and summarizing as a whole, like what AI is. I will say this, because I do want to get into that, right? Because there are ways that the computers and the machines can take trends and then learn from that and become more efficient. But before we get there, I just want to share this tidbit. So I had a presentation the other day, and obviously I was presenting on my company, but no need to mention that part of it. It was really more about, it was to ASIS, a big group organization. We know ASIS was a summit, security summit. And before I started my presentation, I actually and this was on the fly. I did not plan for this, but I realized there were many people on the call that might not actually understand AI and know what that is. And before I started talking about it, I wanted to set the stage, right? And what was interesting is after that presentation, a lot of my feedback was great in regards to how we're creating all these efficiencies and we're creating autonomous access control and eliminate human error and just giving humans more time to do more with what they have. But a key piece of feedback was, thank you so much for defining AI.
Right.
And it's very eye-opening, Jon, because you've been in this industry long enough to know, and also to sit on different sides of the table, that sometimes we miss the simple things. We miss that component of just getting back to reality in a sense, and setting a stage and helping people just understand what's going on. I think a lot of,
and I'll say that to that point, so first and foremost, security persons don't like to not know. So we'll rather pretend we understand than learn, or just dismiss the technology as vaporware and say, no, well, because I don't want to learn that because it's too hard to understand it. And don't get me wrong, I am no AI expert. I'm not a developer, though I'm playing around with trying to learn how to do it because I think it intrigues me. So I'm more of a student of AI and machine learning, a avid pursuer of the knowledge, and then we'll see how it'll apply to security, because there's a couple of factors here that that'll set the stage for that we'll dive into in a minute. But so I think that's great that people actually were humbled enough to say thank you for explaining what AI is, because I think when people hear it, they go right to that science fiction of it's the robots coming down and like replacing human activities. And to your point, I mean, for me, what it means is automating low value tasks and or critical path tasks that need to be mistake proofed.
yes,
Right. So freeing up the humans to handle the higher level value tasks. And for me, when I look at like the guard services, the security officer industry where I got my start, it's all those manual tasks. So this is, I had a group that I managed that was a SOC operator that, because it was about what, 15 years ago, give or take. So there's SOC operator, we had a couple cameras go down that weren't recording, so Murphy's Law, incident happens. We try to look at those cameras, they're down, right? So I'm in contract security officer management at the time. Client goes, got to solve this problem. So now the SOC operator, this is a roughly 200 cameras on site, every half hour is having to confirm that those cameras are recording. So how do they do that? They call up the cameras, they look at them, they confirm recording. Okay. Every half hour, 200 cameras. All right. So do the math, right? Are they able to do are they able to do that efficiently or effectively, or are they just checking the box and saying, yes, I did it? I mean, this is someone who's also viewing these cameras real time. They have facility alarms, they have security alarms, they have phone calls that they're covering, and literally they could spend all their time just checking cameras. That is the optimal process to automate, where you could have a methodology, and now today, fast forward 15 years, like any VMS worth its cost is going to have an automated notification process for when recording isn't happening, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Now that frees up that person to focus on what they need to be doing and evaluate their role so that we can pay them better, so that we're developing our entry-level talent, and they can learn, they can develop, they can get more involved into the security operations process versus checking cameras to make sure they're recording low-value tasks like that. So that's where I see it applying, and if you talk to any of the companies that are working in robotics and are working in AI, none of them who truly understand it will tell you this is a human replacement. It's a human augmentation.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for saying that, because so many people, I think, are scared that their jobs are being taken by robots.
Right.
At the end of the day, we need to remind and maybe enlighten and help people understand that the time that they're actually going to gain from it, it will unleash so much creativity. And remember, to our earlier point, we're speaking in the most positive terms we can, right? When it comes to how we're doing it, it's moralistically driven. we're using it for the right reasons, AI for
Right.
good, tech for good. And I'm
Yeah.
such a like passionate believer in it because I myself have personally gained more time in my life to do things benefiting from an AI experience, whatever I may have been doing, the monotonous task that I couldn't stand doing, I get to put aside and I get to say, okay,
Yeah.
my brain now finally has a little more time or a little more less clouding in it, right? To go do something else. And
Let me give you a
yeah,
non-security example of how AI is helping me in my day-to-day life.
let's hear it.
Microsoft 365 has applied very quietly, very sneakily, a bunch of AI to my life without me even realizing it. So first, it started with asking me, "Hey, we have some analytics that we can run on your email and your calendar. You interested? Fine, I'm in. Whatever." Right? I'm the kind of guy who doesn't read the iTunes, agreement. I just whatever. All right, so
Just
shame
accept.
on me. so I'm like, all right, let's do it. This is cool. So it starts giving me some like, hey, we noticed that when you're scheduling meetings, you're only giving the people that you're scheduling your meetings like 20 minutes lead time. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I look at it and it's really focusing on like, hey, we should meet now. Who has time? Okay, right. So then, but it got me thinking about, all right, am I being a good steward with the resources of my colleagues? Right. So it's just giving you this feedback around how you operate, which was really intriguing. So now I get those insights. So then it starts saying, hey, you really need to put some focus time on your calendar. You have too much meeting time and you're not focusing. You're like doing probably deep work. So it proactively recommends focus time for me to block out my calendar. Awesome. Now it's scanning through my emails and saying, hey, these were a couple action items that were tossed out in the content of emails you received. Do you need to follow up on these? So now I don't have to sit there and sort through my emails. Cortana is sending me a reminder each day saying, hey, we looked at all your emails from yesterday. Here's some stuff you might want to look back into. So think about that. Now I'm proactively scheduling time for deep work on my calendar by the AI algorithm that was created by Microsoft. It's telling me trends in my calendar usage. And I put everything in my calendar. I put my email checking in there. I put my lunch in there. Everything like personal, professional life, I go in my calendar because I'm feeding the beast with more data. So now it can tell me how I'm doing. So now I don't have, those are things that I don't have to deal with anymore because the technology is helping me manage through those and in essence becoming a automated assistant for me.
So
very helpful.
And I think it's fair to say, just because, this topic, we kind of chatted, and as a sneak preview, I mean, if you're open to it, I'm open to it. We don't have a plan when it comes to these calls or these conversations. Just go with it. So, I'm thinking you're getting me going in my mind because I'm like, there's so many ways that we can dive into this and provide so much value to the industry. So for those listening, just to say it, don't be surprised if you see Jon coming back, because we're gonna. You just brought up like so many different points and how you described like your daily tasks and like how your life has personally been uplifted. And if you think about that, like that happens every day, every single day in everybody's life. How many times, every day, do you get a reminder on your computer, a little ping, your meeting's coming up in 15 minutes? Well, that's not like necessarily that like AI where you have machine learning, it's learning and doing something better for you, but that reminder and the monotonous task of having to go to a physical planner to look every day to see when your meeting is and remind yourself when you have to be ready for a meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, if I didn't have my watch on me to tell me that, I would be late.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But that's in the simplest format, right? Now it's maybe time we dive into some of the stuff that pertains specifically to the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to start here. So what I want to start with is the concept of AI readiness. So, and this is for end users and manufacturers. And so like when I was a security director and I was looking at visitor management solutions, and what was really available out there that met all the needs that I have were really the PSUMs, right? And so and this is going to be a roundabout way of getting to where I want to go, so bear with me for a second. But we were sold this concept of the PSUM, and it was like, hey, it's this really cool thing. We'll bolt it on to all your disparate security systems. We'll put everything on one pane of glass. It'll be beautiful. Okay. And everybody said, awesome. Let's do it. Let's jump into it. Well, what didn't happen enough was the concept of PSUM readiness. And what I mean by that was, where's the data? Who owns it? How are you going to get it? How are you going to connect it? And what's the total lift of ownership over time to make this all work together? It all looked really good when the demo was rolled out because it was all sitting in one cloud environment, close together, really easy to work together. So a lot of those either failed and never lived up to the capability, meaning the actual deployment of the systems, or they became these monsters to manage. Because if you think about, I'm taking access control, I'm taking my identity management system through Active Directory or whatever HR system, Workday that I have. I'm using video, I'm plugging into like IT systems to get inside their threat analysis. And then I do an upgrade to my access control system. Now everything's broken. So now I gotta do it all over, right? So when I talk to large end users who really jumped on that PSUM train early, they're either spending boatloads of money to have external service providers keep it going, or they've created a small army internally to manage it. Yep. So that is what I think people are squeamish about in jumping into AI, because the sales pitch is the same. Hey, we got AI. Don't you want AI? Everybody's doing AI. And if you're not doing it, you're missing out. That's both for the manufacturers, because they're getting asked that question from the end users, like, oh, you're XYZ video company. What are you doing for analytics and AI? And if you don't have an answer, it looks like you're behind. And so, and maybe you are, maybe you're not. But if you don't have a really solid like use case or business case for it, then it's just window dressing. And same thing with the end user. When you're thinking about, you want to apply AI, do you have those business cases available that make sense, that you can actually like solve? Do you have a problem that needs to be solved? And can you solve it with something that's not AI first? Or do you really need AI for it? And again, what data are you going to need? Who owns the data? How are you going to aggregate it? What are you doing with it? And so, kind of a lot to unpack there, but like that's where I want to. That's like where I want to start with you and get your thoughts. Maybe have a conversation around that. Is really like, just because it's cool doesn't mean you need it. And if you don't have a problem to solve, then don't get it, because you may only get one shot to put AI in your company. And if you mess it up, then you're going to have a hard time getting the leadership buy-in to get around to.
Right. So I'm triggered. I'm just going to say that, because first off, you brought up PSUM, which in and of itself is its own animal to talk about. So maybe we'll have to save that for another time. But I will say, like, there's a few things here, right? You're talking about data. You really phrased that well when you described like, where's the data coming from? Like, who's managing that data? How are we getting it? Quite simply, your PSIM is going to be just as good as your data is. And if your data is inaccurate, which I'm sure you're used to this, at least I am when I was an integrator, I can't tell you how many times I'd walk into a site and my customer would say, my access control doesn't work. I'd say, okay, let me go take a look. Let's open up the interface. Let's see what we have here. Alarms after alarms after alarms. And they're like, I can't even go in because I don't even know what to look for. And I said, okay, well, how did you originally set it up? Who set it up? Oh, it was my integrator for 10 years ago who got on and got off the job and didn't finish programming it. And it was that kind of snowball effect, right? And then you have PSIM come out and it's like, hey, no matter what issues you have, we're going to fix it. And you're talking AI readiness. The system has to be ready for that, right? Yeah. It has to be built. And so when we talk about data, like I'm thinking, this is getting me thinking about you know, my brain is starting to now process this whole thought of problem solving. Like I'm thinking about how we solve problems and how we, as physical security experts, and you as that consultant who helps guide early on an end user on the path that they should follow, which road they should go down or which path they should go down to make their life better, ultimately, right? That's what we're here for. We're trying to solve problems.
Right.
You can't solve a problem unless you know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I'm not trying to sound like a genius here, because that's not genius. That's not a genius thought. It's a very simple thought. But when you think about peace, and one of the beefs that I had early on was that you had a lot of people from the outside looking in, trying to say, hey, we think we know what your problems are. And then it's like a hit and miss. And then it only created more problems. And there's a reason why it doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah. I mean, the word has almost, you know, turned into you know, this, like, it's only talked about in hushed, quieted corners of the industry as like this curse word. Like, you remember that? It's like, you know, the Voldemort, you know, thou that should not be named. And so, you know, and I still think conceptually, the concept of integrating disparate physical security systems to provide beneficial information to make decisions is still a great concept. Still a great thing to pursue. And so I think the confluence of that foundation plus artificial intelligence to do all the legwork, as opposed to just, we're going to plug it in and show it to you, and that's it.
Basically plug it in, versus problems you have.
yeah, like now you know, like, your problems, and you know they're everywhere. Good luck.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but now we're going to try to, like, address those or give you you know, whatever, like, or solve them, right? And so like, there's room to, like, take these two concepts and merge them, and but you know, again, getting back to that readiness and that use case, and for the manufacturers, the business case. So XYZ access control company comes to me and says, hey, we're using AI. And I say, how? And they say, what do you mean? Then I walk away. Because if you're not equipped to go 2 or 3 questions deep to tell somebody how you're actually using artificial intelligence and machine learning in your product, in your service, then you shouldn't be selling it as that, because you haven't done your homework to really be able to articulate the value. So I'd prefer to have a conversation to say, do you have this problem? Yes, I do. How have you tried to solve it previously? By doing this. We think we have a solution that'll automate it and save you a lot of time and a lot of resources and let you focus on things that matter more.
Yeah.
That's a better conversation to have than just, like, you know, hey, I got this AI, everyone want an AI, come get your AI. And that's not necessarily a security industry thing. That's like a world industry thing, right? That's every industry you look at. You know, it's just like blockchain. It's like those two things where it's like, hey, like, let's go, you know, you got a problem, I got a blockchain. Like, let's go solve it with that. One of my friends was talking about solving like the voting challenges with the usage of blockchain. I'm like, I can't even get my grandmother to use a smartphone. How am I going to get her to vote utilizing blockchain, right? So it's like, you got to make sure that these problems and solutions fit with each other.
Yeah.
You know, and the readiness thing, like, one of the things that was challenging for me and I would imagine if I tried to adopt AI in my legacy security end user group, I would have had the same problems, is that I didn't have the servers to run the GPUs that were necessary to like create the experience that it was needed. And I didn't have the data scientists inside of my organization to actually run anything. So you got to make, so it's like that readiness isn't just the problem and the solution, but it's the resources. And does the company that you're working with have those too?
Right. Well, you're bringing up a couple points, Jon, I do want to dive into quickly. And I know, like, our call, our first discussion really diving into this now, because our previous one was more around how we're using AI to like make our jobs like on your side of the table easier and simpler.
Yeah.
And I think right now, like we've done a really good job at talking about the what. What is AI? We've teed up the how and the why, right? And so when, we're starting to get into this whole concept of like how we execute, right? Like how do we actually use AI to make an impact? And so you're saying how, you have to have data scientists and you have to have someone there to help tee up that data for then the algorithm to know what to do, right? Or to feed it, right? So then it can go make a decision.
Yeah.
So you're saying, oh, if there's a company that can do that for me. That's what I think is what has been missing for so long in the industry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not even just the company that can do it. It's then you also have to have, so if I'm creating an algorithm that's going to identify, the color of fish to determine whether or not they're ready for me to cultivate. I could be the most brilliant data scientist in the world, but if I don't know anything about fish cultivation, I'm not going to be able to create the right algorithm.
Yeah.
So not only do you need the data scientist, but you need the fish expert. So you need both expertise on both sides of the equation. You need the security experts to be working with the AI experts to create relevant algorithms for our industry.
So I think that, because I want to keep this on time and like in the right format, obviously, because we can keep talking. And I think it's already like, we've already agreed we're going to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good way to kind of give the listeners, I guess, somewhat of a sneak peek or a preview of what's to come, because, we chit chat about making this somewhat of a spinoff. I don't know if that's really what it's going to be, but I will say that, I think this is kind of a good point to maybe stop on, because this is now teeing us up for our next conversation about how we do it, what exists today, what products, what technologies, what actual efficiencies are we seeing? What have you experienced? What are you finding out there? And we can now turn that into the true discovery call to discuss technologies that are really AI backed and not say they're AI and then can't perform, right? And I have so much in me right now. I'm trying to bottle up because, there's so much that we can talk about. But I think, Jon, like, I want to let you have the opportunity to share any like thoughts, overarching, lasting thoughts, though, that we can leave the listeners with.
Yeah, I think, what I implore everyone to do is to explore and research on your own. There are through like LinkedIn Learning, and NVIDIA has some great open source resources. Like, just go out and learn about it. Equip yourself, and especially end users, equip yourself with the ability to go even just 2 questions deep. And that becomes so powerful when you can have, more informed conversations around these topics. And there's so much to get into. There's so far you can go. But I think if you're interested, if any of these episodes have resonated with you and you're intrigued by what we're talking about, I also encourage you to reach out to Sarah and I. We're obviously really passionate about this, and we'll talk to anybody about it. But we can also point you in the directions of some of the resources that we've utilized to kind of upskill our knowledge of it. Because it's all out there. It's all available for you to go and learn more. And I will say, while technology is not going to eliminate our jobs, we need to future-proof our capabilities for what the needs of the next generation of companies are seeking. So you can do yourself no harm by understanding this stuff, especially in our industry, especially on the manufacturer services side, if you wanted to make that a competitive differentiator for you in the marketplace, for not maybe the next job, but the job after that, but the companies that don't even exist today, they're going to be looking for talent like you.
Well, lastly, too, a great point, Jon, because AI is not like it's new. It's been around for a very long time. And today, data is being considered one of the highest currencies out there. And our industry of physical security, it's a great like kind of love letter to the industry, or a note out there to the folks who are younger and up and coming. We need more people in our workforce, because if we don't get that, we are not going to succeed. And there's an age gap too. And what's funny is you see a lot of students who go to college and they learn computer science, and then they go to Apple and they go to Google, and why aren't you coming over to, Axis or I don't know, like some of these, like, Anyvision or Alcatraz or any of these companies, right? Because we need you just as much as anyone else does.
We've been doing a series of posts called the Kindness Games. If you look at one that I did, I think it was day 10, or it was specifically a call to action for the security industry to engage young people in university who are graduating now, because they're going to be released into the most challenging job market that we've ever seen in the history of our country. And we need them. We need those people that you're talking about. So let's pull this together. And no, I mean, 100%. So yes, a million times.
Well, awesome. I'm excited for our next conversation, where we'll get into the how and the why. I think that you said it well. If anyone out there wants to reach out to either of us, as our listeners know, and as the listeners know, they can always find us on LinkedIn. It's the easiest way. And then, we'll get this up next week, and I'm excited to keep the conversation going.
Likewise. Appreciate it. Always appreciate the time. Thank you.
We'll talk soon.